Hi everybody, it's Mr. Poser, your human anatomy and physiology teacher. Today we're discussing the anatomy of the appendicular skeletal system. So what am I talking about here? The appendicular skeletal system is referring to the appendages that make up the bones that make up your appendages, so your arms and your legs. We're also going to talk about the bones and the sets of bones and processes that actually help make up the how your legs and your arms attach to your torso. So we're going to be getting a little bit into the pelvic girdle and into the scapula as well, and discuss different bones and different cavities and parts and processes on those bones as well. All right, so let's get into it. Obviously, this is just your generalized skeleton here, which means that there are going to be structures on this diagram that are not part of the appendicular skeleton, and they're going to be part of the other part, which is called the axial. So your axial skeleton refers to your thorax, your skull, and your backbone. All right, everything else is going to be considered the appendicular skeleton, and that's what we're going to cover in detail today. But axial skeleton, we're going to get into in the next video. All right, so speaking of which, the first part of your axial skeleton are your cranial bones. You have several of them up here that are holding your brain in place. All right, so I'm going to show you a cranium in our next video, but it's the case that holds your brain together, and you've got several different bones and sutures up there that are going to be composing that. But over here, these are not your cranial bones. Your head is not your cranium. It's only this part that's called your cranium. Over here we have your facial bones, and it looks like this arrow is just pointing to the mandible or the jawbone, but we're just going to call it the facial bones because it kind of goes in line with the cranial bones over here. All right, so let's get into the appendicular skeleton. I believe there's a few more structures on here that are axial, but we're going to get into most of them right now. All right, so this bone right here, your collar bone, because that's where your collar is. This is called not your collarbone, but it's called your clavicle. And two fun facts about your clavicle: it's actually the last bone to develop in adulthood, and it's also the most commonly broken bone in the human body. Pretty wild. Right inferior to the clavicle, it actually connects with the clavicle. It articulates with it. This is called the scapula. So your scapula is your shoulder blade. And the word scapulus, I believe in Greek, you don't quote me on that, I believe it's Greek, actually translates directly to blade. All right, so there's a reason why it's called the shoulder blade. Scapula actually means blade or like sword. So kind of cool. It's shaped like a blade. We're going to take a look at that in just a second. All right, so the bone that makes up your upper arm, also known as your funny bone, even though when you hit your funny bone, you're not actually hitting your humerus. It's your humerus, though. Get why it's called funny bone, humerus? I am humerus. Anyway, so that makes up your upper bone right here. This is your humerus. And you got two bones in your forearm, though, two of them. So the one the arrow right beneath humerus, this is your ulna. And your ulna is actually the bone that makes up your elbow right here. So by touching your elbow, this is where your ulna is. And I actually have an arm over here that I'm about to show you. So your ulna stays there, but your radius, if we're in anatomical position, is lateral to the ulna. And I'm going to show you my arm here in a second. So as most of you know, this is a real human arm. Or I mean, it used to be. The bones from a real human arm. Okay, so here's the humerus, and here's the radius and ulna. So what you can tell here is that, like I said, here is the ulna, and that's actually making up the point of the elbow. But when you pronate or supinate your arm like this, okay, this is what you're actually doing. So check it out over here. This is the part that rotates. So a good way I like to remember which is which, radius rotates. They'll both start with R, and that's what it actually does. The radius rotates. It's called a pivot joint that allows you to pronate and supinate. Keep your hand up or put it down like that. So there you have it. All right, moving on from there, humerus, ulna, radius. We get into the wrist bones over here. Yeah, I'm going to use sanitizer after I touch those things. The wrist bones over here, and they're called the carpals. So the carpals make up the wrist bone, as in, yeah, like carpal tunnel syndrome. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but it's an issue with your wrist. Let's just go with that. All right. Following the the carpals, you get these bones in your hand right here that kind of make up your palm. Those are called the metacarpals. Meta referring to like middle. All right, and you'll see why we're calling them middle here in just a second, because they're kind of sandwiched between the carpals and the bones that make up your fingers. Each one is called a phalanx. So plural for phalanx, you don't say phalanxes, you say phalanges, which is one of the best words that there is in any language. Phalanges, come on. Anyway, so there's your phalanges. So bones from one finger make up one phalanx, and multiple make up your phalanges. All right, so there's your arm. These bones, humerus, ulna, radius, carpals, metacarpals, phalanges, are actually evident in almost all mammal species. That includes like bats, that includes whales, or tetrapods even. You can find these bones in birds. You can find these bones in alligators. It's wild. Evolution, everybody. All right, let's keep going. This arrow over here is not referring to anything in the appendicular skeleton. This is just simply referring to the rib cage. And we're going to get into the types of ribs in our next video. And we're also going to be dissecting the different parts of the sternum, which is the breastbone. All right, so one of the functions of the skeletal system is protection. And there you have it. Your rib cage and your sternum work together to protect your lungs and your heart. Right? Got a rib cage right there. It's going to do a pretty good job protecting. All right. Down here, we have the vertebral column, okay, also known as your backbone. Saying backbone is misleading because you actually have 26 bones that make up your vertebral column. So, it's more than just one bone. It's like that one song. It's like the arm bone attaches to the dun-dun, your foot bone attaches to the leg bone. Yeah, you have 206 bones. It doesn't work like that. I don't know if that was obvious or not, but whatever. All right, moving on. Here is your pelvic girdle. So the pelvic girdle are the bones that make up the pelvis. And I have one right here. We're going to be taking a look at this in just a little bit. Following that, it's my favorite bone in the human body. It is the longest and strongest bone in the human body. It is called the femur. You may be familiar with this already. So we talked about how the thigh region is the femoral region. You have your femoral artery, femoral nerve, and the femur is the king of all those, right? So this is another real human femur here. As you can see, this thing is dense. It is firm, solid. It's kind of scary, actually, a little bit. But yeah, here's the femur. Put that away for a second. We'll talk about that more later on as well. Inferior to the femur, we have our sesamoid bone over here. It is the patella, also known as the kneecap. All right, so there's the patella. Very similar to the arms, we have one bone followed by two bones followed by a bunch of bones. Some very similar pattern here. So we have two bones in the lower leg as well. The one that makes up your shin is called your tibia. So the one that makes up your shin is your tibia. And just behind that, or posterior to the tibia, it's posterior and lateral a little bit. It's the fibula. Don't call these tibia and fibia. They're not tibia and fibia or tibula and fibula. They're tibia and fibula. All right, say that 10 times fast. Okay, so your tibia makes up your shin. Your fibula is a non-weight-bearing bone that lies posterior and lateral to the tibia. All right, we're taking a while here, so we're going to move on. The ankle bones are called the tarsals. So very similar to the carpals. This line over here, okay, just pretend I'm typing in there. These are called the metatarsals. Okay, so most of the bones that make up like the sole of your foot, those are what are called metatarsals. You have a bunch of them. You have a lot of bones in your feet. They're mostly short bones. And then finally, your toes, they're also phalanges. So one toe is also a phalanx. Seeing as evolutionarily your arms used to be legs, makes sense that you have the same bones, essentially, in your arms and your legs. All right, let's keep it moving here. All right, so as I said, we're going to get into the details about the pelvic girdle. Okay, so we can divide the pelvic girdle into two main components here. The superior portion is called the ilium. I almost typed in the wrong thing. That is called the ilium, I-L-I-U-M. I know those look very similar with this font. And the inferior portion is called the ischium. It's not ischium, it's ischium. Okay, so the ilium and the ischium, and we're going to take a look at several different significant structures within the ilium and the ischium over here. Okay, this bone in the middle, this kind of makes up your butt bone, as I call it. And that's kind of crude, but it's true. It's the bone that you sit on. It's called the sacrum. All right, so when we were discussing the regional body terms, the sacral region was between your hips back there, as referring to the sacrum. This over here, this structure, this kind of, well, it's a notch. It's called the sciatic notch. And I believe when I was talking to some students a few weeks ago, I incorrectly pointed where the sciatic notch is. And there's the sciatic notch. That's a good way to tell, based on the bones of somebody, like their skeletal remains, whether or not they're female or male, based on the wideness of the sciatic notch. All right, so there's the sciatic notch down here. This is the coccyx, also known as the tailbone. Yeah, so it is a vestigial structure. It's an evolutionary remnant of a common ancestor that had a tail. So you have a tailbone. It doesn't do anything, just gets broken. Not helpful. Over here, this hole over here is called the acetabulum. I had been pronouncing that wrong for a couple of years, and this is the first time I'm making a video where I pronounce it correctly. So it is called the acetabulum. And then the last structure I'd like to point out here is actually a joint in between the two ischia on either side of the pelvic girdle. This is called the pubis symphysis. Pubis symphysis. It's a type of joint. So you got cartilage connecting those two sides of the pelvis. Hey, so here's my pelvis over here. It's not my pelvis, but it is my my model pelvis. It's actually, a human pelvis. So this is what I'm talking about. This guy is missing his tailbone, unfortunately, or her tailbone. But yeah, here we are. We have the ilium, the ischium. Here's the acetabulum. The acetabulum articulates with the femur. So check it out. It fits right in there. This pelvis is way too small for this femur, so there's no way this would be a person. Otherwise, they'd be like a stick. But yeah, there you have it. Excellent. We have a little bit more to discuss in this video. We're almost done, promise. We have 3 more structures. This is the scapula. Okay, just a few things I want to point out over here. This structure right at the top. By the way, this is the posterior. This is the posterior scapula, and this is the anterior scapula. Over here, right at the most superior part is called the acromial process, or the acromion. So this is the point of the shoulder. This is where your scapula articulates with the clavicle. Allows you to do this. Okay, and kind of squeeze your clavicles together or bring them back out. So that's called your acromial process. Over here, it articulates with some back muscles. This is called the coracoid process. All right, so the coracoid process and the acromial the acromial and the coracoid. Actually, this is the anterior. So the coracoid, this is going to be kind of articulating with some pectoral muscles. I'm not sure which pectoral muscles, but I'm gonna tell you sometime. All right, so there's the coracoid process, acromial process. All right, and then finally we have the glenoid cavity, and the glenoid cavity, both the femur and the humerus attached to the torso, and they have ball and socket joints. All right, so the glenoid cavity is where the upper portion of the humerus kind of fits in, just like we saw with the femur and the acetabulum. And so thus you have a ball and a socket. You can move it around in all sorts of different directions. All right, that is it for this video. I apologize if I talked a lot, but there's a lot to talk about. Let me know if you have any questions. Bye.